Welcome to the London Hyde Park Stake Relief Society Women's Conference session. We're picking these up from where we left off from last year, and we're rolling out the rest of the sessions online. And as before, they'll be held on the last Sunday of every month. Tonight's session is connecting with your partner. Without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker. So I met Lindsay Pohlman. Lindsay, if you want to give a wave. At a baptism in Whitechapel ward a couple of years ago, Lindsay and her family were traveling from their home in France to see her niece be baptized, who at the time was living in our ward. And that's my first exchange with Lindsay, and I learned more about what she did. Interesting, she was formerly a certified public accountant and now a certified life coach. Lindsay felt quite strongly that this was her calling to help people develop more of their minds, especially with women, on how to not only survive, but to thrive in their marriages. She draws very heavily from her experiences within her own marriage, and obviously through the experiences she has in counseling with others in those partnerships. So I'm going to hand the time over to Lindsay for our session. Thank you, Lindsay.
So happy to be here, you guys. So funny, Zinta, as you were talking, I feel like I re-went through just, like when you kind of go back to a past experience and you just feel like you were there. I mean, I remembered, of course, the moment that we talked and hung, like that was really special, but I was just thinking about my time as switching from a certified public accountant to a life coach and kind of where I was. And that was a time in my life where, my husband had been working as, just so you know, a little bit about me before I jump in. My husband and I met in Thailand in 2005 and dated and got married in Utah about a year later. And, after we got married, he decided to become a dentist. And, after becoming a dentist and, after 3 kids and buying the house and doing all the things, he had some major childhood trauma come to a head. And so he went from like a high functioning dentist to basically non-functioning. And at that time I had like a 3-month-old, 2-year-old, a 4-year-old. And then I had to start working again. And anyway, it was just a really hard time in my life. And it took years for me to find the help that I needed. And so once I found the stuff that I did find through coaching, it just like transformed everything. And so I think that's why I'm so passionate about the stuff that I want to share with you today. So, maybe you came here wanting to learn how to connect with other people. And also while we're learning about that, while we're learning about connecting with our spouses or other loved one, we're also learning, concurrently how to better connect with ourselves. Okay. So, before diving in, I just want to offer up these ideas that what I am teaching will apply to most, if not all of you. But as a coach, I generally serve women who are functioning. So people who can, usually get through the day, finish their, working, getting through the day, doing their regular daily tasks and things like that. And so, so that's kind of who, like the audience and the container I'm speaking to. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. And so there's definitely like overlap between people that I serve and maybe people that therapists serve. But primarily today, I'm just going to be speaking from like my coaching lens, if that makes sense. So anyway, all right. So why is it that we want to feel more connected? Why is it that so many of us seek that like human connection, right? Thing is, it's very biological. We are a tribal species. And literally, back in like caveman times, not being connected to a tribe or a pack of some sort meant death. And so I think that can be helpful to understand that we kind of, even though we have advanced so much since then, our brains still kind of operate in that way. Our brains haven't evolved the way society has evolved. So anyway, before I was actually planning to do this. I don't know if all of you guys know this, but I was planning to do this presentation a year ago before everything kind of got locked down and shut down. And when I was planning that presentation, I sent out a type form request, which some of you responded to. And because I wanted to get a feel for what you guys are experiencing on a local level. Um, and as I talk about, why we don't feel connected, if there's something that doesn't come up for you or you're curious, you feel like something is unique to you that I don't cover, totally like, right, ask a question or put it in the question so that we can discuss that too. And this can be a presentation, of course, but we can make this as interactive as we want it to be. So if you have questions as I go, throw them in. Zinta or Carlene will interrupt and say something. So we can just make this, as interactive.
We'll do it at the end, Lindsay, I
Okay,
think.
that's
I mean,
okay.
unless you wanted to do on the spot some sort of interaction around anything particular, but we'll hold that Q&A at
Oh
the
yeah.
end. So if
Okay.
everyone can feed their questions through, we'll collate them all and then ask them at the end, if
Okay,
that works
perfect.
for you.
Oh, yeah, that's totally fine. And if there is something that I am missing though, and like Zinta, you'll notice when the questions come in, like, oh, that is pertinent right now, then of course just jump in. So we're going to start with why we're not connected. And then we're going to define connection, which can be really helpful. And then I'm just going to give you some ideas on how to take some actionable steps towards finding that connection with your spouse and with yourself. And also, when you're not getting what you're wanting from your spouse, how to kind of compensate for that too. All right. So let's see. You guys can see my screen, right? It's just the slides. We're good. Okay. Okay, so when with the type form responses, the biggest thing that I saw was just this like different versions of I don't know. Okay, so one person said, "How do you know when you are disconnected, especially if the years pass?" Okay, another person said, "I just can't get him to open up." Another person said, "I just don't know like the right questions to get to ask my spouse to get him to open up." So there's a big like I don't know theme, which is really common, with my coaching clients too, and just as humans. Another reason we don't feel connected is we're just exhausted. And this is it's fascinating because, I asked you guys these questions a year ago and then COVID came. And so I can just like see these responses, but also like at a whole new level. And so one person said, what do we do when we're both at max capacity, struggling to support each other because we're in need of, we know our spouses are in need of support. But how can we do that and get ourselves into like out of survival mode? Another person said, I wasn't prepared for how hard it would be to work on our relationship when we have kids and babies to take care of 24/7. Another person said, it takes energy and effort to connect. And after a long day with kids and him at work, it's really hard to spend time connecting. Okay. Another reason, couples, some of the things that I noticed that people were saying was just some version of something that had to do with electronics, right? So one person said, my husband spends a lot of time playing mindless games on his phone. Another person said, my husband usually spends several hours at night working. And by the time he's done, we're both tired. Another person said, my husband's on his phone during those prime family hours. Another person said, I'm worried about what my husband does on his phone. And, so those are just different versions of things that I've heard from you guys. And it's something that's really normal that I hear from my clients too. And I think this is kind of an interesting one, especially, for some of us who have like I guess, to be frank, like in any culture, I think there's usually some expectation of what marriage is going to look like. And then when things don't match up to what we hope for or what we, fantasize about or what we expect, it can just be kind of hard to to basically, to just accept the dissonance between what you wanted and what your reality might be. So one person said, maybe I expect too much, right? So and I don't know about you guys, but I know for me, like as an adolescent, I just kind of like grew up thinking that if I checked off these certain boxes, if I get my degrees and do this and this and this and this, like then all of this will come into play. All of this stuff will fall into place. And, I think we all, I don't know if you guys can relate, but I picked that up from lots of different places in my life, whether it was movies or books I read or, within like, religious cultures or things like that. I took on these ideas and belief systems, and then things didn't turn out that way. Right. And so I think that was kind of a hard thing for me when, when my husband suddenly was like non-functioning, not working, not able to take care of himself. And that was like one component of it, but I think the hardest part for me honestly was when I thought like, no, he's capable of working now, he's functioning now, and then he wasn't working. So when I thought that he could be working and he wasn't, based on like my expectation or whatnot, I think that's when it was really hard for me. And I just found myself feeling like really resentful and frustrated. Definitely had my bouts of hopelessness. And so, just think about you, like when you are, the whole theme of this presentation is on connection, right? And when we're frustrated or resentful, how are we behaving, right? Are we going and snuggling up to our spouses or people that we love? Are we withdrawing? Are we distracting? And so, because of my expectation that wasn't there, I found myself feeling resentful and then I would pull away, right? So, it could just be something to kind of notice. And then another thing that I really notice is this idea is just like fear, like different. And again, it's like different flavors of the fear. So, again, this is all within a container and the as I address fear today, I want you to know that I'm addressing it within the container of a marriage where abuse is not present. Okay. So I'm going to give you guys some examples of like fear, but this is like just general fear where we're not afraid of any abuse happening. Well, you'll see as I kind of explain it. So, one thing that someone said was, I have a hard time believing that he loves me. How do I know if this is my problem or his? And another person said, it's hard to easily express my feelings without worrying about the other person taking things personally. And I just want you to know, like, it can be really normal to want to dissociate or avoid facing any um, fear around like finding deeper connection. So that's like our normal instinct, right? Is just to like avoid all that. And I'm just going to give you like an example of how this might show up. So let's say that, um, let's say that there's something I want to tell my husband, like something happens, whether it's something at school or something at work or maybe something with money. And I just like know that in the past he might like blow a fuse or get really mad, right? So me not telling him out of like fear for what he may or may not do, like it's a way like we're not opening up any avenues for connection, right? And so again, I'm saying this within the bounds of a non-abusive relationship where there is opportunity and there is space for us to practice being vulnerable and even being willing to be scared and, courageous in changing our marital patterns or things like that. So, another thing about this too is like if we aren't willing to be more vulnerable with our spouses or we're not willing to share our ideas or our opinions out of like fear or just not wanting to like deal with his response, it's a way of like kind of subconsciously controlling his response if you think about it, right? Because we're like, he'll respond this way, and so I'm just like not going to tell him, right? And then we're also not, if the goal is to deepen our connection or deepen our intimacy, by not being ourselves, we're also not giving them a chance to respond to ourselves as we're trying to open up and share something vulnerable. And we're not giving ourselves a chance to build that like mental muscle of being open, being vulnerable, and taking care of ourselves regardless of what his response might be. Does that kind of make sense? So it can kind of just like perpetuate this cycle of not being open and connected with our spouses or with our partners or other people that we love. That makes sense? So I'm going to show you guys that today that even though some of us may have been, raised or socialized to think that it was like these external things in the universe that would cause us to feel connected and engaged in our marriages or our partnerships, what's going on inside of us is what matters and is what is going to help us feel more connected. And I will say, like, it doesn't mean we just like chop our fear off. Like, fear is there for a reason. And so there is a way to like, we can honor our fear and like, we can honor our fear. And when we do that, we are like, it helps us accept our past and have the clarity we want in the present so that we can navigate to where we want to go to in the future. Okay. And then just real quick before we dive into a little bit more of the connection, I think one thing to ask yourselves is, when I sent this poll out, I asked everybody, what are the things you're confused about with regard to connection? And everybody shared their answers. And I said, where is this on your priority list? And every single response was like 9, 10, and there were like a few eights. So I think it could be helpful to just ask yourself, like, okay, this is one of my top priorities. If I just look back at yesterday, how much time did I actually consciously spend connecting with my spouse? Right? Was it like a minute, 5 minutes, 0 minutes, an hour? It could be anything, right? And so just keep in mind, like, the cool thing is as we're developing out our connection with our spouses and with ourselves, it doesn't mean just because it might be like a 9 or a 10, that doesn't actually mean we have to allocate the most time to it. But it could be worth, asking yourself every day, like, how can I just like move the needle like a little bit? What can I do today that's a little bit different than yesterday? Because I think sometimes people like think that radical change over time takes radical change on a daily basis. And I actually think it's just like the little small things that we do that are just a tiny bit different that kind of compound over time. So that's the cool thing too, is like developing new patterns in your marriage and developing new thinking patterns. Like, it doesn't have to be this big, huge blow up, everything change the next day. It's like, what can I just do today? Right. Okay, so I'm just making sure there's nothing that I missed there. Okay, so on this slide, I just wanted to talk about connection and confusion. I was trying to think of a good picture that would represent it, and I liked this one because it kind of just shows animals kind of going everywhere. And so, on the last slides, I didn't solve for anything because I wanted to just kind of like let you guys see where people are generally confused, but then define it and then see how we can move forward once we kind of define it. And so I think a lot of times like our definition of connection is pretty skewed, right? A lot of us think it is dependent on our external things and like the external world. And the interesting thing too is like when we stay in this space of confusion, we don't act, right? At least for me. Like if I'm in a confused space, I will just like not act. I'll distract myself and I won't take any action towards getting what I want. And so again, um, we can indulge here, but just remember like being confused, if this is you, if you have been confused in a relationship, it could just be a sort of protective mechanism, right? It could be protecting you from vulnerability and deepening intimacy with your spouse or with someone else that you care about. And so if you can relate to that, it's like, oh, this isn't a problem. This is just a part of me, my lower brain, trying to protect me. So if that's the case, what if this confusion is optional? And, what have the benefits been of being in confusion, like staying in confusion? I think it can actually be helpful to just ask, like, if I've been confused about this, what's the benefit? And what I would argue or offer is that there has been a benefit. And the benefit is probably something you're protective or survival based, right? Something like our lower brains want to operate from, they want us to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and operate with ease. And so understanding the why we maybe have stayed in confusion, even if it's been subconscious, can help us get to this place of just acceptance and even gratitude for that part of us that wants to protect us so that we can more naturally kind of start shifting towards guiding ourselves into a state of more connection. Okay. So if that's you, just notice it. It doesn't mean anything negative about you. It actually might mean that things are working pretty normally in your brain. So, yes, let's see. And so some of the other things that people are confused about, I think a lot of people don't recognize that confusion is optional. And then, like I said, confusion, some people think confusion should come from someone else. And so I just thought it could be really fun from here out to just decide that, like, if confusion is optional, what if we just decided not to be confused for the rest of this call, right? Like, what if we just decided to pretend that we have the answers? What if we actually know so much more than we give ourselves credit for? And that's something that's like doing this work with humans is so powerful because a lot of times people will say, I don't know. And then if we say, if you had to know, what would you say? And then they're like, boom, like they just have so much access to so much insight and information. So, from this space where we have the answers, let's talk about connection. All right. So, I want to explain something to you guys about emotions as we talk about connection. So, I see connection or connectedness as an emotion that we feel. Okay. And as humans, what I've been taught and as I've become more aware of it, what I've noticed is that pretty much everything we do or don't do in life is in search of an emotion or running away from an emotion. Okay, so think about something that you've really wanted in your life that's been like really important to you. Okay. And when you think about that thing, what is the emotion behind having the thing that you want? Or what is the emotion behind you running away from whatever thing that you're absolutely afraid of? So while you guys are thinking, I would say for me, even going to college and getting a degree, someone might just say, well, yeah, that's just a logical, rational thing to do. For me, I was buying certainty, right? I was investing money, I was working hard, and I was buying the certainty. And, not to say that the certainty is actually certain, but I had this idea in my head, this thought in my mind that if I do this, I will be able to get a job. And so for me, investing in college was a way for me to invest in certainty. Okay. Or like car insurance, right? Or health insurance, right? Like you can buy different things. I guess I don't know how it is in the UK, but like you can pay different amounts based on how much like certainty or safety you decide you want to feel. Like for me, there might be years where I'm like, yeah, I don't know what could happen. I'm going to get this plan or get this. And it's kind of like for me to feel safety. Okay. Or when I want to go do something really big that I've never done before, whether it's like starting a business or running a race or something, and I don't do the thing, why is that? Is it actually because of external circumstances or is it because of fear or something or vulnerability, fear of vulnerability? So if you just think about it, start paying attention to yourself. Like, what is the thing behind the thing? Okay. Because a lot of this, I think this can be really helpful because then as we're wanting to develop our own sense of connection, then we can ask like, well, what am I thinking or not thinking that's driving me to feel connected or disconnected? Okay. So, because if connection is an emotion that we feel, and if our thoughts drive our emotions, then we could probably feel it or channel it anytime we want to. And that being said, that doesn't actually mean that we may want to feel it all the time, right? There are certain things that might happen in the world where I wouldn't want to feel connected, and that's totally fine. But just knowing that I'm choosing it can be really, really powerful or impactful. All right. So this is one of my favorite quotes. And it says, you can hold tension between two opposing forces. If you do that, there will emerge a third way that will transcend the two and make way for evolution. The reason I love this is because our cute little brains like to operate in extreme, right? Like if you think about a teenager who might not want to hang out with us or something like that, we might think that if they don't want to be with us, we're disconnected from them. We can't be connected to them, right? And then on the other extreme, it's like I can only be connected to them when they want to be with us. And I just want to offer this idea that when we can hold the tension between two opposing thoughts or ideas and just like be willing to like think, hold the tension between those two, I really think it creates and holds space for evolution, right? So, what if our teenager loves us? They just really wanted to play video games that day, right? And what if when we're not with our teenager, we can still be connected to them because of how we're thinking, right? If you think about like a kid or someone that you love on their first day of school or their first day of work, we could be thinking about them all day and feel connected, right? And on the flip side, we can spend time with a human, we can spend a whole weekend with somebody and not feel connected at all. Okay. So I just love this idea that, like, I think it's really normal for our brains to go into this all or nothing, either or, this or that state. And I just want to offer this idea that there's when we can just let ourselves sit with two thoughts or two extreme ideas, so much more can open up. Right. And so that's kind of even, with my clients when they're thinking about like marriage or divorce, like if I stay married, this is good for my kids. If I get divorced, this is bad for my kids. What if there's so much more in the middle? Right. And if we can hold space and love ourselves in both spaces, in both places, I think that can get us to this place of calm, connectedness with ourselves, where we can like access our creative power that we all have to just have ideas. Okay. So going back again to, where I was at, for 4 ish years ago, it'd been about 2 years since my husband had stopped working. And my darkest, I think at the time, it felt like my darkest moment. Today, I look at it a little bit differently, but it was this space where I really saw that like I couldn't affect change in my husband. Okay. And I just remember deciding that I needed to provide the independence that I was wanting from within. And I decided that I was going to be the person to provide for me and to take care of my wants. And I decided to take ownership of the idea that I was in the driver's seat of my life instead of feeling like I was on this bucking horse that I had no reins. I felt very reactive. And so I kind of just remember this like idea going through my mind. It was just like, Lindsay, like, just take the reins, just take the reins. And from that space where I kind of like, figuratively took the reins, I was able to find solutions to problems, the problems I had control of. So in that dark moment where, I realized I couldn't change him, I now see it was also one of the brightest because it was where I realized I could always change me. Okay. And the answer is going to look differently for everybody. For me, it worked out the way that it did with with everything working out for me. But I think we just have so much more power within that we kind of forget about sometimes. So if our emotions come from our thinking, even when someone is trying to make us feel, oh, this is, yeah, even when someone is trying to make us feel better, if we don't believe it about ourselves, it can be very short-lived and it's not sustainable. So I wanted to prove this point to you that, connection is an emotion that we choose to create or not create with our thinking. And so I was going to give you guys a quick example. My husband, so he was kind of like that guy who was just like always a leader. He was like the, high school student body president, like leader on his mission, played collegiate sports, leader, like when he was in dental school, just like he was just like everywhere he went, he was a leader. Okay. And everyone adored him. And when he worked as a dentist, like nobody quit working for him. Like everyone just like loved him. And when he was in like the depths of his depression and his anxiety and wasn't able to work, I remember like doing everything I could to just like try to tell him how amazing he was. Like, don't you see? Like, can't you see? Like, how amazing you are. Like, you are this, you are this, you are enough just right now for existing. I don't know, I'm getting emotional thinking about it. But I like, just I did everything I could to try to help him see his worth, right? So the circumstance was I'm telling him why. I have so much evidence, but because of his thinking, and he's really open about this, by the way, because of his thinking, he completely deflected everything, right? So I'm telling him how amazing he was. And then he chose to think something like, if everybody really knew me, they wouldn't say those things. And then he would continue to feel rejected, despondent, and sad, right? And then eventually, when he found coaching, he started opening up to these ideas like, hey, maybe I'm not what I used to think, right? And so he was able to shift himself from the space of like rejected, despondent, very, very hopeless, just gradually shift himself into this space where he did see his value. But it wasn't because of what I was saying, it's because of what he chose to think and believe about himself. And so the reason I really want to drive this home is if we want to be connected to our spouses, even if they're telling us how amazing we are and we still feel disconnected, if they're telling us we're amazing, if they're not telling us, we still get to choose our connection. And sure, it's really fun to be on the receiving end of people giving us compliments. And we still have to like intentionally receive it in our minds. Like, yeah, I am amazing. Yeah, I am worth it. Right. And so we have to choose to think something to feel that connection. Okay. And so this has probably been happening already in your lives. It's just a matter of bringing it to our awareness so we can see even more like how much power lies in that idea. Okay, so here are I'm just going to give you some ideas and teaching points to help you see where we can see where our power lies in our ability to feel connected to our spouses. And the first thing is just this idea of taking ownership for our emotions. Okay. So when our connection or emotions are based on someone else's behavior, we're a little bit more reactive, right? And this isn't a problem, but it can just be helpful to pay attention to how you might feel um, if you can relate. So for me, when I'm in a space where my emotions are dependent on someone else, then I might be feeling more reactive, powerless, or hurt, right? And then sometimes when we're feeling like reactive, I think a lot of times as women, we go into like action mode or we try to fix things by like doing stuff. And so it's like an attempt to control outcomes. Yet, even when we take action and we do these things and it feels like we have control, that's usually just more of an illusion. And so it can just be helpful to see like everything our spouse is doing really is because of them, and even though it feels like I'm responding to him, everything I'm doing is because of how I'm choosing to think about the things. And this doesn't mean we're supposed to choose happiness every time, right? There are times I still want to choose to be disappointed about things. There are times I still want to choose sadness. And when I know I'm choosing those things, then the ball is in my court so that I can release it when I'm ready, right? Because the thing is like when we're trying to push our spouses to do something or to behave a certain way, what I see sometimes and what I've noticed with myself is like, yeah, I want them not only to take out the trash, but I want them to want to take out the trash. And then they take out the trash and they're not happy about it. And then we're still upset. Right. And so that's why it can just be really helpful to just like start paying attention to how we're thinking about things and where we want our emotions to be. And I want you to know it starts with us. And this is the best news. To me, it's the best news ever because then they get to own their stuff and I get to own mine, right? And we can choose connection when we want. And again, we might not want to every time, and that's okay too. Okay, so another thing that can help us with our connection is just like recognizing our lovability, right? Like when we talk about Christ-like love, like our lovability is absolute. And I just believe that the world would be such a different place if all of us really believe this in relation to ourselves. I think it's really easy to believe it about other people, and it's a lot harder to turn inward. And I'm not sure exactly why, but It just seems like that's how a lot of us are prone to thinking or doing. It's just like not wanting to turn inward, turn that lovability inward. So for a moment, what if we just all went to a place where we saw ourselves and all of our humanity from like this space of love, right? So if you want, you know, think of yourself a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Okay. And if it's hard to think about yourself from a space of love, like you can think about someone really close to you too. And my guess is like you adore them, like one of those best friends of yours, like you adore like all of them, like all the complexities and like different things, like you love all of it. And so when we think about ourselves, what, how do we see ourselves a year from now, 5 years from now? What is that version of ourselves, 5 years from now? Like, what does she think about connection? Has she been able to find it in herself? Is there more confusion? Is there less confusion? And I just want to say there's no right answer here, but I think sometimes when we're in the moment, it can be harder to access our lovability. But when we're willing to go to like a future self and take like a helicopter view, it's just like it can be so powerful. Right. And I remember when I was like in like the depths of my really tough time in my marriage. And I remember going to a yoga class. And that was just one thing that I felt like I needed to do. And I remember like I was just doing this random pose and I had this like flash, like almost like this quick flash view of me, like a pen, like someone I was able to see myself from like 15, 20 feet above. And I remember just being like, look at that woman. Like she's doing it. Like she's keeping her, I'm sorry, I'm like not, I didn't know I was gonna get emotional today. But I remember just being like, when I was able to just like take a step back, it's like she's keeping her kids alive and she's supporting her husband. And sure, she's gained some weight in the process, but maybe that was meant to be too. Like she's gained some weight. It makes sense given all the stress that she's been going through. And she's gorgeous and she's strong. And I just like still remember like just thinking like, I'm sure this is how God looks at like a way, like maybe not exactly, but I just felt like this is probably how our Heavenly Father is looking down on us. Like, look at them. They're waking up every day. And it's hard for them to do the things that they do when they're doing it anyway because of love, because of the people they love, because of the people they're committed to. So if we can just like take a few steps back and like deepen that love for ourselves, I'm telling you guys, it is everything. And it will drive you to make the decisions you want to make as you keep moving forward in your life and developing that for yourselves. Like it will just naturally come for the people that you love, your husband, your kids. You don't even have to think as much about it because you've turned inward and that's where your power lies. Okay. All right. Lovability, unconditional love. So this comes without conditions, right? Like without getting everything done on your to do list, like loving yourself no matter what. Okay. If you push pause for a minute and think about some of your greatest mentors in the universe, greatest mentors in the world who have changed your lives for the better, probably just a bunch of other humans doing human things, but there happened to be a right place, right time where they really influenced you and they really were there. Gosh, I'm like I did not know I was going to get emotional today. I'm like thinking of all these different like angels that just like showed up in my life, like right when I needed them. But like to them, it might not have meant that much, but those brief encounters can be everything to you. And I think that's just a sign of like our Heavenly Father's love for us and a sign that He's looking out for us and He's there. And there are angels like beyond the veil, but there are also like very physical ones that we can see that are showing up for us. So knowing all of that, it can just be really helpful to find ways to better love and accept yourself right now, right? Kind of like I said on the last slide, like we are beautiful and strong. And there's so many things that just don't matter that we worry about that on the grand scheme of things, they just don't matter. And sometimes having big life events totally sucks, but it can really help you cut the fat out of your life, cut the things out that just like don't matter, right? Like my circles got really small when I was struggling, but it was a small circle of total angels that like changed my life. And they were women who, sorry, I'm like, didn't know I was going to get this emotional today. They were women who I knew I wasn't going to be able to pay back. I knew, and I'm not talking about like money, but like in service. Like I knew I wasn't going to be able to like watch their kids the way they watched my kids because they didn't even have kids that young. But I just think it's such a beautiful thing to like embrace that rhythm of like a sisterhood and women like loving and serving each other and paying it forward. And I think, the more we can love ourselves, the more we can just like receive all the beautiful love that is coming our way. Okay, so real quick, as we're taking action, when I know I've been talking about this connected thing, and it really does start with that like lovability and deepening that unconditional love because that can open you up to receiving. And also, like as we're taking action, like I think it's really normal when we want something to change, we only think about the action, right? I want you to know that like we want to be thinking differently too as we're taking action so that our results can be sustainable. So we want to be committed to loving ourselves in all of it. We want to be committed to not needing to be right or have the last say. We want to, we don't have to, but maybe relinquish some control because it might actually just be an illusion of control anyway. Okay. And we also want to take responsibility for ourselves and for our emotions. And it may not feel fair, but I'm telling you guys, we want to be responsible for all of our anger, all of our disappointment, all of our sadness, all of our frustration, because then we can actually do something with it and process it and move on when we're ready. We do not want it to be because of the other humans. Okay. All right. So, and I'm not saying that like other humans don't do horrible things. I'm just saying if someone does a horrible thing, we might feel that less desirable feeling because of how we're thinking, and it just makes sense. But we want it to be because of how we're choosing to think and not because we have no choice over our emotions. Does that make sense? I'm going to open up to questions in a second. So let's see. Okay, so the last quick thing I want to hurry and off. I'm just going to hurry and offer is this idea of relationship circles. So I think a lot of times, when we think about a partner or a spouse, we're like, yeah, I want a lover, a parenting partner, a traveling companion, someone to laugh with, someone I can do this with and this with and this with and this with and this with. And it sounds so fun and it sounds so pretty, right? Also, if we were married to someone who was like, you need to be all these things, might not feel that good. And so my point in offering this is that as we move forward, if there are things we're wanting in our spouse that aren't there or that our spouse doesn't want to do, we can find other want matches outside of the realm of our marriage, right? Like my husband likes to travel, but he doesn't like to travel spontaneously. So guess what? I have friends that are willing to do that, right? He loves to travel. It needs to be planned. And, I love doing so many things with my husband. He's amazing. I actually don't love shopping with my husband, right? And so these things, these ways that we want to feel connected with someone where we think we need to have the intellectual stimulation or this or that. I just want to offer this idea that if you're not getting it within the container of a married relationship or someone you're dating, or if it's a parent-child thing, like what if you could find it somewhere else too, right? Like, what if you could just find someone else that does want to travel spontaneously on the weekends? Or what if your husband doesn't want to cuddle that much, but you love that physical connection? I've heard there are like hugging clubs where you can go get like a 5-minute hug from someone. Isn't that amazing? Right? We can get that physical time like with our kids. And my husband might not necessarily care where I am all the time. My kids kind of do. And so in the workbook that Zinta's gonna post, I think it'll be posted on the website with the video. There's a little workbook there, and it kind of has you go through and list out, leave some space for you to kind of list out things that you are wanting. And what you can do is just kind of go through and be like, yes, husband, yes, spouse, yes, this. And if it's not something you're getting from your partner or loved one or in your life, then what if we just start opening up to um, other people, finding that with other people? I think that is it. So I'm going to stop the share. And then if anyone has questions, let me know. This has been so wonderful. I really appreciate you guys listening to me. I'm kind of laughing because I just, I don't know, I'm just kind of laughing at how like my emotions during this call. But I just want you guys all to know that this stuff really has changed my life so much. And just understanding that basic, like the way we think drives the way we feel. Like just that connection can make the biggest difference in our lives. And again, just want to let you guys know I'm grateful for my savior who was there through this, all of everything that I went through with me. Even when I was mad, even when I was mad at him, I still always knew he was there. It was like I still felt connected to him, almost like a spiritual teenager. Like I was mad. I still knew he loved me. I still knew he had me. And I feel like he was cool with that too. Like I think he probably gets it when we have those rough times. He's probably like, yeah, of course she's in pain. It's cool. Let's let her be how she needs to be so she can figure things out. All right. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for sharing such personal information with us. And there are a lot of themes that were coming out of that. But I just want to remind people, those who do have questions, to pop it into the chat to Naomi Notice, and she'll feed those through to us. So Carleen and I will sort of go backwards and forwards and sort of ask questions. But for me, there were some things that came about, I think that were quite beautiful ones that you highlighted, and how women support each other through those times when we're struggling, and in creating connection. And that's a beautiful thing, particularly here, we're here in Relief Society. I just have, I'll kick off with one question that sort of came through. And another thing that you highlight in terms of connecting with others is the need to connect with ourselves. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the practical tips that you can share with us that would help create connection with self, so then we can be connected with others?
Oh, it's such a great question. I would say a lot of the basic like grounding work that we do can be really connected experience. And so like anytime you're getting something from the inside to the outside of your body, it can be a very connected and healing experience. So that could be like going for a walk and just talking out loud. Like, I know it kind of sounds a little bit weird. I mean, you don't have to do it out loud if someone's passing you, but like something like that can be writing.
I do it out loud.
I do it when I go paddleboarding. Sometimes I do. I feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I'll sing out loud. It's kind of fun. But yes, like, so any basic grounding things like that you can do. So, touching the earth, writing, just being really open and honest with yourself where you're at. And I would say the biggest thing if you're taking that time, do it from a space of curiosity and not judgment. So we're not supposed to be a certain way at any time. We just are. And the more we can just look at ourselves with curiosity, the more we can just have a lot of compassion and understanding, because self-care is like really pretty. And I think it's foundational to connection. But the thinking involved really counts, right? Like if I try to go do a self-care walk and I'm hating on myself the whole time, it's probably not going to be very connecting, right? And so with those typical self-care things, it's like, how do I want to talk to myself? And I would say the easiest way is to think of either just like a best friend or like a child version of yourself. Like, that's so cute. Of course you're sad. Like, of course this hard thing is going on. It makes perfect sense. Right. And so we want to just like love ourselves where we are so that we can shift more naturally and organically to where we want to be. And so, if I'm going for a walk for self care and let's say I don't really feel like it, I'm just like honest with myself too. Like, but I'm honest and curious. So, like, I'm not in the mood to do this today and I'm committed to moving my body, but it's just a way to be connected to me where I'm at right now. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's just kind of listing off some of those practical things. I think as we share them, it might give some others ideas. So you mentioned writing, going for a walk. I think there's something really valuable in just that physical movement. When I run, it does that for me as well. It offers some kind of connection with myself.
Mm,
So if it's just, if any, I mean, some people do have a creative practice where they sort of do it in that way, where they connect with themselves. Nature's
mhm.
obviously um, one of the gifts that is given to us to be able to kind of nurture that connection as well. So it's carving a space out, isn't it, in terms of our time to be able to do that in
Yeah,
order to um, to be able to feed others in that way.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's carving ourselves out with the loving self talk. Like, I think that's what we miss sometimes is like just loving ourselves no matter like wherever we're at, whatever we're doing. Cause self care isn't self care if we're being a jerk to ourselves and our brain, you know?
I read
good point.
somewhere, I think last year, everyone's kind of struggling with the pandemic and trying to figure out how to self care. And I read somewhere that it's not a luxury, self care is not a luxury, but it's a discipline. Like it's something that you have to do. You have to carve out time for that. You have to set aside space for yourself. And I think
Mhm.
it ties back into something you said earlier about learning how to love yourself more to then be able to love someone else. And self care is definitely helping you do that, that discipline to like know what you're worth and love yourself and then have that discipline bleed into other things and caring for other people.
Yeah,
I
I
have a
love that.
question. When we feel exhausted, especially because we're all trying to survive in a pandemic, how do we find energy to reach out and connect to those around us?
Mm, that's so beautiful. So I think it can be I just remembering that we can be connected to someone even if we're not seeing them. So just like the way, you know, if you think about someone like your nephew or a kid who's like going to their first day of school ever, right? Even though we're not seeing them, like we can still feel and create that connection for him. And so, but when we're really tired and we're not able to like, at least for me personally, when I'm like in a really tired space and I'm not able to like go do all the things or make all the cookies or like, all of those like connected things, I really just believe that like honoring myself can be one of the best things like to help me do those things that I want to do in the future. So I just feel like there's seasons for everything. And when I was going through like all my really tough stuff, like it was my season of never offering to watch anyone's kids. It was my season of, like just not doing those regular things that we want to do to like serve and connect. And I just like decided that I wanted to let that be my time to do that thing. Is there anything in that question I missed?
And it was just saying, like, how do we find energy to reach out? And I think you kind of knocked on it a little bit. I think talking about how when you don't have that energy, you don't have that output, just don't try or just don't, just know that you don't have it right now. And I like how you mentioned a season. But maybe, I mean, I would think that, I don't know, like, yeah, how, if you're flatlining for months and months and months, but you want to reach out to someone, how do you
Yeah.
do that?
Oh, so I mean, I think reaching out first, you want to like define what that means. Like the point of reaching out is like so that someone knows that you care
Mm.
or someone knows that you're thinking about them. So if you can get clear on the point of it, then you might actually see how easy it can be. right? So if some people might think, oh, I can't reach out to her because I don't have time to make a dinner, or I don't have time to like, I can't take a lunch break and go do these hard things. But honestly, like one of my friends, she was talking about prayer and how even with prayer, it doesn't always have to be like words, right? She was like, what if it could be closing our eyes and just visualizing and thinking about things or people that we care and love about? And what if that's like the same thing? And so, what if like we can still do those things, or like still like we can still be connected to people just by like thinking about them and like loving them and like sending that energy out into the world. And I do think that we are all connected in that way. And like there are people that I just didn't reach out to, whether it was via phone call or text or email, for a long time. And there were some people where I just said like, I love you, and when I have more time, let's get together. And so it can be really simple, like, I love you and I'm so tired and I can't wait to connect next year, or this. So you can do those quick little things, but if you don't have the energy for that, like, just give yourself some grace and know that that's okay too.
Great.
I have a question here. In your presentation, you mentioned fear as a way of not feeling connected. So what are some practical tips that you can that would help us not to tiptoe around that fear? I guess we're looking for some bypassing to enable that connection. How do we address that with some practical tips that you might have?
Yeah. So, I mean, if we're thinking about it like having a difficult conversation, I think, and if you remind me after, I can like I can email it to you. But when we're anticipating like a difficult conversation that we're going to have, sometimes it can be helpful to anticipate what might happen, so that we can see what thinking comes up, because usually that's why there is the fear. We're like anticipating something, and then we have thoughts about that thing, and then there's like the fear, or the vulnerability hangover. And so I think for me, just letting myself know before the difficult thing, or before doing the difficult thing, is we can feel fear and do something anyway, right? We can feel scared and committed to following through with something, and then just like remind ourselves like, hey, I've always been okay. Right? I've always been okay. I've pretty much always figured things out, and I'm all like, everything is figure outable. And so, no, we don't have control over the person or the other tough stuff. But what if we just decided that no matter what, we can have our back and that we can figure things out? Because we probably already have. So we can use the evidence that we're alive right now, to support the fact that we've pretty much figured everything out that we've needed to still be alive. Because sometimes it feels like death, like survival is at stake, when really that's just our lower brain trying to protect us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does. And just kind of like to roll on the back of what you just said.
Yeah.
Then in your previous presentation, you were talking about vulnerability, and how how we realize that in itself can be actually a weakness and not a strength. Like, being vulnerable is good because you have to let people in. Can you give us an example? Maybe, I don't want to go too personal, but like, how do we tear down those walls? We have so many strong women in our stake, and they shoulder so much. And I feel like some of us choose disconnection at times to kind of just self-heal, but not realizing that we do need to be vulnerable and to open up to people. How would you advise us to do that?
That's a great question. I think again, it just is like your self-talk, knowing that you can always have your back no matter what.
Okay.
Right. And so just being like, I know for me, like, I felt really isolated in the beginning, especially because, again, I'm not disparaging my spouse. We're both really open about our experience. But he'd been hiding like some porn news from me. And so in the beginning, it felt really isolating to be trying to figure that out, along with him suddenly not working and everything. But I will tell you guys, like, being vulnerable and just letting yourself, first of all, just saying it to yourself, like, this is hard. Like, this is hard. Like, things got really real, a lot more real than I ever knew as a kid they could get, right? So just being really open with yourself and being vulnerable with yourself, I think can be like, and not judging yourself. I think that actually might be the starting point to being able to do that with other humans. And I will tell you guys, being able, like, communicating your hard with safe people, like, you will find your tribe and it will be the biggest blessing you could ever ask for, because I found my tribe of, like, my angels that I told you guys all about because I reached out, or because I was willing to tell someone that, like, my husband isn't working right now, but he doesn't want anyone to know, because I was willing to. I even remember, like, reaching out to my husband's step grandma, like, really randomly, but she was like a doctor and he didn't want me to reach out to her, but I was like, well, she's the doctor in the family. Everyone else is lawyers. So I'm just going to reach out to her. And it was the best thing because she's like, oh yeah, there's like a history of depression. And I was like, how do we not know this, right? Because no one is talking about it. And for my husband, just to know that his grandpa who had passed, that his grandpa felt something similar too, was so healing. And then from there, he found out his aunt struggled with depression and he was like, oh, it's okay. And so when you reach out, not everybody's going to love what you're doing. Like, but we're not meant to be like loved by the universe, right? Like, not everybody likes a peach. It doesn't mean peaches are gross. It just means some people don't like peaches. But when you are your true self, you will find your tribe and it will be the best thing ever in your life. Like, I can't stress that enough.
That's great. No, thank you. Yeah. Just putting independence down for a minute, leaving it alone, and admitting it to ourselves in the beginning. I guess that's the hardest step, but that's the first one. So it's downhill from there.
Right. And, we all just, like, it's true. I love how you say that. Like, once you just get the ball rolling, like, and just start with some safe people, and you might mess up. Like, you might share something with someone and it doesn't go that well. It's like, that doesn't mean that we just like zip things back up again. It's like, oh, okay, what can I learn from this? Let's try someone else, right? And sometimes, like, it depends on what you guys are going through. What I've noticed with my clients is that sometimes it's the people closest to you that push back the most as you're starting to change. And so, if you grew up in a family and there's a certain family dynamic and you're trying to break from that, they might think something's wrong with you. And, like, what if we just, like, let them think that as we figure stuff out? So sometimes we get pushback from our own family and that can feel really hard. And for some people, it can feel like a betrayal, but just know, like, that's not generally the intention. It's just what is because of what they know with what their experience is. And so it doesn't have to be a problem, but finding safe people is the key. So, yeah.
So we need to become safe people so people can feel like we can trust them as well. I guess it's a learning for all of us. So our time has come to a close. It's been lovely to have an evening with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carlene, for your comments as well. It's been lovely to facilitate the question with you as well.
Yeah.
So just Kanya, if you just want to run a poll's going to pop up on your screen. If you can just kind of quickly fill that out while I introduce the next session. So our next section will be held on the 28th of February. It's the last Sunday of the month. And I guess, Kenya, if you could pop up that schedule as well. It's on LDS and LGBTQ. So it'll be a panel discussion. And we're going to open up a dialogue around homosexuality and other gender-related challenges. And so you're going to hear some lived experiences of those who experience same-gender attraction, as well as the experiences of their families. So this is an equally important topic in terms of creating sort of safe spaces. It was interesting when I was trying to create this panel discussion, I couldn't find a woman who felt safe enough to discuss this. I mean, given the fact that obviously it will be presented in this way, so it's not for everybody. But we've got a lot of work to do to make people feel more safe. So hopefully that will be a session that will help us to increase our understanding as we help our fellow travelers. Yeah, so that one's on the 28th of February. And as you can see here on the screen, all the other sessions that are coming up. Well, such a special night. Thank you. You'll have this recording in probably a week's time. We'll upload it, as I mentioned, on our website. And I'll also upload that workbook that Lindsay referred to, which takes you through a bunch of questioning. Is that right, Lindsay?
Yeah, it just has a few prompts and then a little worksheet for like those relationship circles if you want to kind of like build that out for yourself.
Great. We'll put that in our resource section. So thank you. And we're getting some thank yous through our chats as well. Thank you for a great talk.
Of course.
So everyone have a lovely week. Thank you.